Hey fellas. Something a lot of people in the murdered drones community have been talking about a lot is the strong desire for a season 2. While Glitch and Liam have explicitly stated that the show is done as of now, that still hasn't settled the fandom for what should be in this hypothetical second season, whenever a continuation or a prequel whatever. So in this video I will give out my 2 cents on what should be in MD season 2. I'm going to cut to the chase. I think we need a prequel. As fun as the show is, Murdered Drones actually does a pretty terrible job at explaining many important plot details to the audience. Many in the community have stated they had to rewatch the series numerous times just to get what's going on, which, while you may argue makes the show very rewatchable, it is very off-putting for the casual viewer looking for an entry point into the show. If we get a prequel, we can put into context a lot of unexplained details of the main show and give the viewer a reason to care for a lot what's going on in this fictional world. From a storytelling perspective, this kind of thing would only work well in 10 or more episodes. However, the amazing digital circus is dominating Glitch's other shows in terms of viewer counts, and the last time we got a 10 episode show for a season was Meet a Runner. So like the first season of Murder Drones, this would stick to the traditional 8. Now, one thing that was criminally underrepresented in the first season was a lack of character development for the human cast, with the only real exception to this being Tessa, the silly bean who spends all her time talking to the robots she finds in the trash. Additionally, as I want this story to encompass everything, from the very beginning of the Worker Drones creation, to right before the first season's pilot, these plot lines would have to be jam-packed with detail, no room for filler and making every second count. For this very reason, I'm making this an episodic show. The 8 episode run will be split into 4 distinct arcs, starting with the company arc, the manor arc, the genocide arc, and finally the cabin fever arc. For you to get what I really mean, I'll cut to the chase and explain what each episode will be about. Some will be longer than others, but that's solely because I had a lot more imagination put into them. Episode 1. JC Jensen is struggling as a company. No one is interested in their cleaning products and their stock prices are dropping fast. In attempt to remedy this, the company purchases the legal patent and materials to an invention of Task Corp's bot boys. Yes, this is a Meet a Runner crossover. However, this detail is incredibly minor and won't be brought up again in the story. With some modifications to the base design of the robot, they'd make it more humanoid and expressive, thus creating the world's first worker drones. After going on the market, these robots would become a cultural success, making JC Jensen billions overnight. Our main characters this episode would be the JC Jensen CEO, Mr. Jensen himself, his secretary, and a whole wacky cast of one-liner speaking staff. Episode 2. We see the culture of Earth evolve as more and more people begin using worker drones in day-to-day life. Most people are happy, however a small minority of people would ridicule JC Jensen for making a machine that can suffer like humans do, with no legal prohibitions telling what people can and cannot do to their drones. Essentially human rights activists for worker drones. Along with those who want drones to be treated with dignity, there would also be a fringe set of humans who'd also want to treat worker drones as family, sometimes even marrying them. JC Jensen would specifically target these people in a propaganda campaign in an attempt to discredit the drone rights activist movement as a whole, making sure no one will be taken seriously for wanting drones to be saved from suffering. Episode 3. This is where we'd meet familiar faces to Murder Drones. Starting off with us learning what N, V and J's lives were like before joining the Elliott Manor. N used to work in a doggy daycare center. The dogs made him happy and he loved every moment working there, though one day a pitbull chihuahua mix peed on his leg, causing him to short circuit and he got thrown out. V used to be a golfing assistant. She would carry the supplies her master and master's friends used in the games and would recover the balls that flown too far out the field. Due to her having a vision defect, however, her master got angry and pummeled her with a golf club before being disposed in the trash. Jay worked at a so-called drone correctional facility, a place where hostile or simply disobedient drones would be beaten and tortured until they complied with their human masters. Jay was given a whip and commanded to beat these rebels into submission, something she quickly grew to enjoy and gain masochistic pleasure from. Eventually the motors in her arms worn out and like N and V she got trashed as well. After these brief insights into their past lives, The wholesome bean Tessa would be seen going on her adventures to the dump, rescuing the broken and discarded drones, taking them home and giving them the hair from the dead bodies she bleaches grey and grooms. We'd also peek into the lives of Tessa's parents, James and Louisa Elliott. We'd learn that James was a war veteran, having partook in World War 57 during his younger years, as in 1,000 years a dozen or more world wars were bound to happen, and Louisa was once a music idol, now forgotten by the general public due to losing her beauty. While we're at it, even Frumptle Bucket and Katie could get some character development. Frumptle Peak is a proficient salesman who made his buck selling rubber duckies and to lesser extent actual buckets, with Katie being his wife who's only interested in his money. Yeah, Katie is a gold digger, why else she'd marry such an old man? Episode 4. We wouldn't move from the Elliott Manor yet, as Sin didn't get her pre-manor origin explained in episode 3. It would be introduced in this episode's beginning right now, notably in a more fleshed out origin than the other 3 drones. Sin was bought by a farmer on an otherwise robot-free farm. The man didn't like automated machinery and preferred to physically labor for crops himself. The only reason he wanted Sin was as a companion. As you see, he used to have a wife who died giving birth to their stillborn child. The child's name was going to be Cynthia. Sin was meant to be a way he could cope without having a real daughter, and instead of forcing her to work for him, he treated her like his child and talked to her, cleaned her, and let her play with the various farm animals he owned. One day, however, Sin wanted to catch a chicken that escaped the farmer's chicken coop that jumped the fence and went into a neighboring farmer's field. There she got accidentally run over by a drone-operated crop harvester, and in order to prevent enraging their neighbor, the drone threw Sin's lifeless body into a trash heap. After this flashback, we'd see Tessa fall in love with N while bickering with her parents. Despite this, N is not comfortable with the arrangement and would much prefer to be with V instead. Tessa wouldn't lash out at V as she's not evil like her parents, though she'll still often try to keep N for long periods of time all to herself in a desperate effort to change his mind. Sin, who wasn't really aware what happened to her back at the farm, would still get to remain innocent before becoming gradually more aware as time passes that her new living conditions are anything but ideal. In the library and away from the others, N and V would sit down and talk about their mutual romantic feelings. N would suggest that they should try to escape the manor, which he is initially adamant on. But as he realized V might get punished by Tessa's parents as well, he quickly gives up. The two would have an intimate kiss scene on the carpet because I can write in whatever I want. As there were other drones in the gala besides the familiar 4, we could actually get to know how these lesser known characters didn't capture Tessa's heart like the others, being generally unremarkable bots who didn't earn the right to retain their personalities during the disassembly drone conversion process in Sin's eyes. While we're still here, perhaps Tessa could have a chance encounter with intern Mitchell, albeit before he joined JC Jensen and was still searching for employment. If we assume there were previous gala events before the one Sin killed all the attendees in, Mitchell would accidentally bump into Maid V while she was pushing a food trolley, causing the contents to all fall out on the floor. But unlike the other humans who would leave the drones to pick it up all by themselves, Mitchell would offer to help her as he was partially responsible himself. Tessa would walk in on seeing this surprising friendly interaction, where the two humans would introduce themselves and quickly become friends. Despite neither of them being related, Mitchell could act like the cool uncle type, passing on his wisdom to Tessa in order to make her life a little more bearable. Tessa saw him as a good friend, as unlike most people he wasn't judgmental of her attraction to Robot, and was even supportive of it unlike her parents. While Mitchell has yet to meet Yeva as he's still on Earth, if we make him in support of worker drone rights from the beginning, we can establish him as being a strongly compassionate character, making him stick in the viewer's mind. Don't worry, this won't be the last we'll see of him. Episode 5. Another time skip takes place, and the disassembly drones are rampaging the streets like in Mass Destruction's flashback, along with us learning that Frumptle Bucket actually escaped the gala and kinda put up a fight before dying in his attempt to avenge the now deceased Katie. We'd look to the ground floor where human resistance members are trying to survive the endless swarms of Sin's murder pets. With resources depleted, they need every little advantage possible in order to make it through alive. One human, Jake, a rebellious young man who's a member of a clan of survivors, is trying to avenge the death of his mom. would create an improvised weapon that successfully damaged serial designation J, who was attempting to focus him down. After her regenerating body reboots, a glitch would cause her to be knocked offline from Sin's control, reverting her mind to before Tessa was brutally murdered. Now aware of what she had done, she would immediately defect from her robot brethren and wish to aid the humans. She would gradually take a particular fancy for Jake due to his defiant behavior, which challenges her often smug and bossy attitude. A neighboring faction of human resistance members who had beef with Jake's clan would obtain their own personal robot ally. However, instead of it being found as with Jay, it would be made using various techno-organic parts from deceased drones. They would construct Lovemov, a Frankenstein's abomination who, due to his rudimentary and rather unsophisticated AI, it could not be possessed by the absolute solver and remains incredibly loyal throughout the story. With each day getting worse and worse, people from both factions would be slowly picked off, one by one. With no reason not to compromise, the two clans would make an alliance, no longer fighting over vital resources such as food and medical supplies. Now with Renegade J and Lovemov on one team, a new enemy would arise. Due to many humans incinerating worker drones in mass under the fear they'd also go under disassembly drone conversion, Sin would commit her worst atrocity yet. Instead of killing every human they'd see, some people would be abducted and taken to a factory, repurposed from old drone disassembly plants. They now housed conversion units which could forcefully modify humans into disassembly drone hybrids called resembles. These converted humans had their free will hijacked by twisted parodies of who they were before the procedure, making it loud and clear to the resistance members who they used to be before their grisly fate. Our boy Jake would end up being captured by a resemble and taken to the factory, with Jay having fell in love with the survivor due to him heavily reminding her of Tessa. She'd demand all the other humans in the clan to help her rescue him by infiltrating the base, even subduing Lovemov to assert her dominance. By the time they would arrive, however, Jake was halfway through the conversion process, his forearms and lower legs amputated, replaced with disassembly drone versions. The next step would be for the buzzsaw-filled drone mask to be placed over his face, taking over his mind and fully making him a resemble like many before. But at the last second Jay would rush in, destroying the contraption with a bazooka rocket. As Jake fainted from all the pain he was in, Jay would free him from his restraints and carry him on her shoulder, taking him back home to base. While still in grief over the fact she couldn't save him sooner, she was happy that something could at least be done, unlike with her past human companion. Episode 6. Now after such a dramatic conclusion last episode, Jake would regain consciousness, suddenly alerted to a painful sensation in his body after his partial conversion. Jay would try to comfort him, but after realizing a genocide is still going on, he powers through the pain, getting up and attempted to meet up with his allies. Thanks to the modifications he was supposed to have under the condition he would have been Sin's puppet, Jake can now use disassembly drone weaponry such as claws, blades and launchers, which he quickly learns how to use shortly after gaining his footing. When news comes in from a stray survivor, there have been reports that a giant pillar coming from the ground resembling a power plant might be the source of the resemble's brainwashing. If they were somehow able to get inside, they could destroy its servers and liberate every single resemble, giving humanity a fighting chance at fending off Sin and the disassembly drones. And so Jake, Jay, a group of survivors and Lovemov would plan to do such thing. They'd initially seem successful after a dramatic break-in scene with numerous fights. However, after blasting the servers, Sin would physically introduce herself to our heroes. As it turns out, in every resemble's helmet is an electrical device which she can toggle whenever she likes, in the process frying the brain of the resemble in a slow and painful death. Except from the partially converted Jake, every resemble is killed, much to the shock of our heroes. Not willing to make everything up to here pointless, the good guys decide they've got to destroy Sin right here and right now. A big dramatic fight scene takes place, but very quickly into the battle Sin keeps making the heroes slip up, catching them off guard and playing off their weaknesses with very little effort. All of this turned out to be a game for her. She'd beat Jay to the ground, demolish Lovemov, and hold a bloody Jake, commanding the brainwashed serial designation V to peel him like a potato. Sin would force Jay to watch this, her love interest being skinned alive in a manner not too different to that of Tessa. Sin would consider keeping his skin, possibly to put in her wardrobes of nasty cosplays later. Mentally broken, Jay would stop resisting. Instead of trying to rebel against robot Satan, she'd give in to the delusion Tessa was still alive, burying her emotions of Jake and what happened that day. This is how Jay became so cold in the main series. Even after attempting to fight back, she was only faced with more and more heartbreak, giving her the conclusion there is no one who could ever save her from sin. Also, it works well if you take this line with V into account. Episode 7. Another time skip takes place, this time to the beginning of the cabin fever lab experiments. We meet up again with our favorite intern Mitchell, who's now working under the watchful eye of Dr. Chambers. Chambers is a belligerent man who, thanks to special surgery, has 4 disassembly drone arms that emerge from his back. Doc Ock from Spider-Man style. He often has violent outbursts, and using his mechanical arms will sometimes torture worker drone patients, even when nothing is to gain from it. Chambers juggles between acting like an actual doctor, performing the necessary tasks on the solver-infected drones when necessary, and spending time inside his office, essentially acting as the leader of this research-centered branch of J.C. Jensen. Below Chambers is Dr. Edley, a straight-headed woman who expects things to happen soon as she wants them to happen and not a second later. She had dreams of becoming a mathematician, so she could be a world-renowned teacher for the most prestigious of universities. However, with the destruction of Earth and the many previous human-inhabited exoplanets, she needed to change her line of work into her current profession in order to make a sufficient living. Aside from our 3 officially named human characters, is Morris. In the original Mass Destruction, this character was just an unnamed human in an orange protective suit with only a single second of screen time. But for the sake of making this story seem more cleverly written than it actually is, he'll be given lore. Morris was a childhood friend of Mitchell's. Whenever Mitchie boy's feeling down, he's there to give his own weird and impractical advice. It's essentially a subversion of what happened earlier in the story with Mitchell befriending Tessa on Earth. Mitchell has a strong aversion to anything that could harm drones, instead preferring to do the chores no one else would do, such as mopping the floors and checking rooms for hazardous materials. In this case, that's the very unstable and dangerous solver flesh these drones may shed in the humans' torturous experiments. He'd get to know 2 drones who seem to know each other, Nori and Yeva. The latter captures his eye as in its hand holds a portable game console containing Tetris, something he himself had fond memories of playing as a kid. Offering Yeva a candy bar from a vending machine, Mitchell politely asks if he can borrow the game from her, where he gives it a try. Surprisingly, he still had a knack for this kind of thing all these years later. This piques Yeva's interest, and after having the game returned to her, she gestures to Nori how she feels this human is different from the others. As more and more time passes, we see Mitchell help out more drones, including Amber and Alice, letting them sit down to talk about their feelings, giving them treats when other humans aren't looking, and treating any of the injuries the drones received from the experiments. Despite this, most of them didn't stick around him for long. Assuming he had some ulterior motive, Nori and Yeva, however, would open up more to him. Nori would be a laid-back friend somewhat like Thad, while Yeva, as the often quieter and more introverted type, she would adore the human for his warm and clumsy personality, beginning to fall in love. During one of these chit-chats, Dr. Ridley would walk in. On seeing this, she'd scold the man for doing something so unnecessary for J.C. Jensen, showing affection to their little lab rats, and warns him not to do it again, or drastic changes will be needed. Mitchell tries to plea his way out of this, but this only makes her angrier and decides to notify Dr. Chambers about his little hobby. This in turn makes Chambers have a bad impression of the intern. Inside Chambers' office, it would be revealed that on his desk reside 2 cube-like devices. While usually inactive, once they're awake they both have simplistic yellow faces projecting on one side of their cuboid bodies and are capable of speech. These cubes would be revealed to be Sin and Jay in Indonesian cube-styled forms, something they took on of their own accord. As in a huge twist of things, Dr. Chambers actually made a deal with Sin to find a way he can become immortal at the cost that he makes her an immortal bunny rabbit serum for UC. Chambers actually invented the medicine that allows 4 dogs to become immortal as mentioned in Cabin Fever, and Sin is a more of a bunny person than N who likes dogs, so she contacted him. This, however, is supposed to be top secret and not known by anyone else. While Chambers could have just made a serum for humans, Not only would he risk those undesirable to him potentially getting their hands on it, he would still be restrained by human limitations. With only the cybernetic augmentations a human body could accept, his options for empowering himself would still be very limiting. For why he plans to cut out the middleman of his human body, putting his mind in the framework of a crucifix-patched, solver-infected drone, in order to become an unstoppable godlike being, incapable of being possessed by sin. Sometime during all of this, an aimless employee would knock on Chambers' room and ask to talk with him. After finding some loose documents of his secret plan, he'd inquire about this goal to finding immortality, questioning if this whole research operation of understanding the solver was a front for his own personal gain. Of course, Chambers isn't so happy someone found about his secret, and after locking the exit, Dawson and Jay would change into their drone forms, brutally killing the employee. Later, Sin might play around with the idea of her and Chambers being a couple for funsies, but this isn't really to be taken that seriously, though I will note as a part of their deal he fed his own face to the zombie goober, so they aren't too drastically different to date. A couple of days later, Yeva and the rest of the cabin fever drones would create a makeshift room, somewhere they can attend to chat about whatever they want during their break times to avoid being watched over by humans. While initially unaware of this, Mitchell would be invited to one of these by Yeva, while the other drones would feel scared at this, worrying it might result in them getting caught and punished. Nori stands up to Yeva's decision to invite the human, reminding them all of the various acts of kindness he'd done for them. A montage of many weeks pass, and along with Mitchell being shown passionate to his job, we see him tell his robot friends about the many things he used to do before joining JC Jensen, making the group empathize with him more and more as time passes. One day, after Yeva couldn't take the abuse the other humans were putting on her, the absolute solver she was infected with took over her mind. Before this, the crucifix patch had no effect on her. She rampaged through the laboratory, attacking both drones and humans alike. The Sentinels were unable to stop her as she was using her solver wings to cover her face. Despite orders by Ridley to retreat, Mitchell refuses and tries to snap Yeva out of her possession. Despite all the danger he's putting himself through, he manages to get right in front of her and gives her one big embrace. She bites down into one of his shoulders, but doesn't react in pain or try to push her off. He calmly tries inserting the USB patch into the socket located on the back of her head. And for the first time ever, it successfully works, making Yeva the first solver-infected drone whose body did not reject the patch, all thanks to their love. Despite the violation of orders that took place, Ridley doesn't scold Mitchell this time but instead sincerely thanks him. Dr. Chambers, who watched all this take place from his security cameras, isn't so understanding however. Turns out because Mitchell successfully patched Yeva without using torture, this jeopardized his quest for immortality as he needed a mentally broken drone to be cured in order to make it a suitable vessel to transfer his mind into. After telling Ridley to come to his office, Chambers demands Ridley to find anything incriminating on Mitchell that could lead to him getting another strike on his intern status. He got one strike for chatting with the drones as companions, a second for disobeying Ridley's orders to flee from Yeva, and now he only needs one more before JC Jensen's higher-ups will let him be booted out from Cabin Fever Labs, as Mitchell doesn't actually know about Chambers' immortality plan. He is bound by what little morals he has to not just kill him. She wants to reject Chambers' demands, but because she knows the secret, only being spared to her exceptional benefit to the company, he threatens her with the lives of her family, so she begrudgingly accepts. Yeah, I made this character into a neurotic nutcase. One day when Morris is on his own, Ridley bargains him with a raise, under the condition that he can sneak a tiny camera onto Mitchell's mask when he isn't looking. Because Morris is desperate for cash, he instantly accepts without hesitation. After Mitchell attends another chat time with Yeva and the other drones in their makeshift private room, the tiny camera placed on by Morris streams from Mitchell's masks what he sees to a monitor in Chambers' office, allowing him to find their hidden room and punish the intern with a third strike. After other human workers arrive to the scene, the drones are dragged out and tortured. Their standardized cells reduced to lockers they would be chained in as punishment for their disobedience with the humans. Due to the predicament Mitchell was in, he wasn't ready to leave the drones behind, and so he impersonated Dr. Chambers by wearing his uniform. He just wanted one last day to see Yeva before saying goodbye. This is where the flashback from Murdered Drones episode 7 Mass Destruction would take place. Yeva felt betrayed not knowing the full story, explaining how she acted towards him. Because Chambers knew Solver was going to take control of Nori's body and destroy the planet, he evacuated Copper 9 in a spaceship. In his spaceship, Dr. Chambers is confronted by Sin and Jay. Sin is mad at Chambers for failing to keep up his side of the bargain and stabs him in the heart with one of her blade arms, even though this wound is fatal, due to Chambers having fried all the pain receptors in his body from numerous experimentations. He didn't feel the agonizing sensation she wanted him to feel, which he taunts her with, so Sin commands Jay to change the screen on her face to a recording of J.C. Jensen's company rap, a jingle the company made in its early years in attempt to convince young people to join the company. It's so painfully corny the mere sound of it is comparable to being waterboarded in Mr. Beast's expired slop food. Chambers is forced to watch this video on loop until the bleeding slowly kills him, which only makes him beg for the sweet release of death. Episode 8. After the explosion which partially imploded Copper 9, Yeva and the newly patched Nori woke up once they were standing before in the cathedral. Due to being stabbed in the face with the patch, Nori is severely weakened and is constantly fading in and out of consciousness, requiring Yeva to support her body as they journey through the notably less crowded research center. Every human has died, for the exception of Mitchell, due to wearing Dr. Chambers' suit, which was made of a more durable material than the other suits. Most of his body was actually protected from the blast. However, due to his mask being shattered, some of the explosion's energy made contact with his body. The mask now melded to his searing hot flesh. Mitchell is in absolute agony, unable to speak due to the condition his face is in, and if he isn't treated for his injuries immediately he'll die. Yeva knows this as an absolute fact and immediately goes into panic mode. The one human who ever cared for her, her love interest, is about to die right in front of her. That's when she remembers something. Back in the previous episode she overheard two men talking about Chambers' plan to transfer his mind into a drone body. With no time to waste, she immediately rushes to the recently abandoned office of Chambers, and in a secured box she unlocks with her solver she finds the mind transplantation device, a metal collar-like contraption placed around a human's forehead in order to transfer their mind to a drone vessel. She runs back to where Mitchell was lying, still in pain, but the life in him is gradually fading. She secures the device to his melting hot head, being careful not to hurt him further, and links it up to a blank drone body that would have been used by J.C. Jensen for spare parts. On the drone's visor, there is a percentage bar starting from 0% and gradually going up to 100 as the mind transfer is going on. It is almost completely done, but the smoldering heat still radiating off Mitchell's head melts through the contraption, breaking it beyond functionality at 99% completion. Yeva immediately tenses up on seeing this, assuming for the worst that Mitchell would be gone for good, but to her relief the drone vessel gains consciousness. While the intern is relieved of his physical pain, he freaks out finding he is no longer human. When seeing Yeva with tears of joy, however, he quickly pieces things together and hugs her as a sign of gratitude. However, their moment of peace doesn't last. The debilitated Nori points out to the others that Mitchell's human body has mysteriously gone missing, as if it just stood up and walked off when they weren't looking. There's no time for them to ponder on what could have happened, and they need to focus on what's happening in the moment. So using his knowledge of Cabin Fever Lab's layout, Mitchell suggests to Yeva and Nori they should get to the secret elevator in order to escape. On their way they'd meet Amber and the still somewhat sane Alice. They'd all follow Mitchell's directions and make themselves to the office area the majority of Dead End was set in. But suddenly, there is something behind them. During the mind transfer process Mitchell underwent, a small remnant of his mind was retained in his human body, making him an incomplete transfer. Combined that with the radiation his body was exposed to, his old husk mutated into an animalistic creature that could be best described as looking like SCP-096, or the Rake. This I'll refer to as Meat Shell. Meat Shell pursues drone Mitchell and the others, swallowing whole with its stretching mouth any of the other surviving drones that were unfortunate to be in his way. Amber and Alice are forced to split off from the group, with the latter thinking the others left them to die. Not even the Sentinels could help our gang, as their sensors only scanned the creature's DNA as purely being human and left it alone. That or they crap themselves. Mitch, Yeva and Nori all get to the elevator with Mitchell right on their tail. He almost gets into the elevator but the doors shut on his ribcage. His lower half is left dangling outside, being crushed and scraped away by the walls of the elevator shaft as it ascends to the top floor. The creature is screaming in pain. For while the most part just making typical monster screeches, it also can be audibly heard crying out to Yeva. Once the trio get to the top, the monster had died from blood loss. Drone Mitchell and Yeva are left incredibly traumatized from this. Mitchell especially, as he essentially watched himself die. Luckily for Nori, she was still very phased out of the moment and was barely conscious enough to know what happened. As they see the exit to the building, an earthquake caused by the recent implosion violently shakes the building, encasing the trio in a huge mass of snow. Later, as our heroes regain consciousness, they are still submerged in snow, but now free from the terrible lab's horrors. A recently liberated Khan just so happened to be exploring Camp 98.7, when Ori would surprise him begging for help in their first canonical meetup. Soon after, Mitchell and Yeva would be helped out the snow by the assistance of other surface-dwelling worker drones. Now for a fact they could finally rest. There might be no true humans left on the planet anymore, but being essentially spared from destruction thanks to Yeva, Mitchell got a second chance. That's when he noticed something. This whole time Yeva was actually carrying a duffel bag. Inside the bag were 2 glowing drone cores. As it turns out, in the previous episode, Dr. Ridley and Morris also cheated death. Due to the two being the most recent victims of the Solver's man-eating flesh pit, their consciousnesses weren't in there long enough to be absorbed beyond restoration, and once the null blast inside of it was set off, their digitized minds were burped out, getting caught in 2 blank drone cores Yeva discovered when looking for the contraption she needed to save the melting in agony human Mitchell. With a little tinkering, Mitchell got the cores working in some blank drone vessels, and Morris and Ridley were now conscious. Even after all the pain he was put through, he forgave his 2 former co-workers, as he saw no reason to desire revenge considering there is nothing more to fight over. It is there when Khan looks to Mitchell and asks for his name. This is where he realized that if any surface-dwelling drone were to recognize him as formerly human, from his voice and name, he would be in serious trouble. So on the spot he comes up with the fake alias Adam. Yeva is the Russian equivalent of Eve, so by calling himself Adam, they would be Adam and Eve. Some time passes and a lot develops for the liberated worker drone race. Khan would fall in love with Nori. Mitchell, using his programming knowledge as a former intern, would devise a way 2 drones could create a child and made the world's first untrained neural network, that being Doll. He would share this development with the rest of the workers, and so Khan and Nori would create Uzi Dorman. The 2 families would often hang out with each other. Adam, who for convenience I'll continue to call Mitchell, would become a great friend of Khan as they'd relate in their struggles of being dads. Pill baby Uzi would always get angry when Mitchell was around the others, even though Khan just thought of it as her being cute. She instinctually is the embodiment of the "does he know?" meme. Ridley would take on the alias of Sarah and become the same character of the series canon. While not as close in terms of Khan's friendship, Mitchell would still talk to her time to time. Her presence would be comforting to him, and the 2 would reminisce on things they missed from their human lives. Morris would become this one nameless drone with a mustache, who now goes under the alias of Rodrigo. Even though Mitchell had forgiven him for ratting him out to Chambers, Morris could never shake off the sense of guilt that plagued his mind from that day on. They'd all take a photo together, some of the characters' expressions being explained by things mentioned before. 20 so years would pass since humanity's demise on Copper 9. Uzi and Doll are now young adults, and Nori would have prophecies of sky demons coming to the planet to murder them all. Mitchell, Yeva and Doll would all be going for a wholesome family stroll down a forest. Big smiles would be across their faces. They'd all feel like nothing could take away this joy from them. Oh boy, how seriously wrong they were. Serial designation V would find them, bloodlust in her eyes. She'd impale Yeva before she had any time to react, her core destroyed from nanite acid leaking into her chest. Using what little time he had, Mitchell managed to hide Doll in an old abandoned car. However, V saw him also attempt to climb inside, pulling him out by his legs while sadistically laughing. Using his knowledge on boot looping, Mitchell would try to flash his camera in V's face. but the device's output wasn't strong enough and is slapped aside. The last thing we would see would be a POV of Mitchell as V pinned him down, striking her tail into his face, giving him a fatal error. Cut to black. Play ending theme. The end. So that's it. That's my Murder Drone Season 2 pitch. A Human X drone cringe fest full of seasoned background characters given stupid amounts of lore. In all seriousness, thank you so much for watching all the way through. This has been a seriously big project of mine and has taken 2 good months to come to fruition. If this gets enough reception, I'll perhaps make another video explaining why I chose certain aspects for the plot and my defenses for such. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful day and God bless to you and your loved ones. Amen.